Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, December 15th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Senate to work on a border deal for Ukraine aid. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has decided to keep senators in town next week to continue negotiations on a border deal that will unlock a massive $111 billion spending package that includes military aid for everybody. There's aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan in this huge spending package that they want to pass. And the Senate's holiday recess was set to start on Friday, but Schumer is delaying that as he says negotiations are moving along. Schumer said, quote, "The Senate will return Monday. That will give negotiators from the White House, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans a time to work through the weekend in an effort to reach a framework agreement," end quote. So House Speaker Mike Johnson has already adjourned the House. So the House is not sticking around. They're going on their holiday recess, which is very long. I mean, December 15th through after the New Year, that's a long time off. But anyway, so that means even if the Senate does reach a deal, they're not going to be able to finalize this bill and pass it and make it law until after the new year. Johnson said the House will not wait around to receive and debate a rushed product. So Schumer vowed that there will still be a vote on the military aid package next week. He said, quote, "No matter what, members should be aware that we will vote on a supplemental proposal next week," end quote. So Republicans are looking for significant changes to immigration laws to make it harder for migrants to enter the country. And there are signs that President Biden is willing to give them what they want to secure the over $60 billion that he wants to fund the proxy war in Ukraine for another year. CBS reported that the White House indicated to Congress that it would support new immigration restrictions, including giving border officials the authority to expel migrants without processing their asylum claims, and a dramatic expansion of deportations and detentions. So Biden is willing to make these huge compromises on immigration, but he's not going to budge on Ukraine no matter what. He wants that over $60 billion to fund this unwinnable war for another year. And how many people are going to be killed fighting on that front line in eastern Ukraine in the next year? It just doesn't matter to him or doesn't matter to anyone. And, you know, the Republicans are saying, most of them, actually, you know, there is at least still some Republicans against continuing funding this war. But when it comes to Republican leadership, they're all saying they're going to give him this Ukraine aid once they get their border deal. So it does look like that's going to pass eventually. It's just a matter of time. He's not getting it as soon as he would have liked to. All right, so the next one here, the House passes the $886 billion National Defense Authorization Act. So the Senate passed this bill on Wednesday night, and now the House passed it on Thursday. And this is the NDAA. This is what funds the Pentagon, and it also funds some military spending in other government agencies. And it's worth $886 billion. So now it heads to President Biden's desk. He's probably going to sign it on Friday sometime. And this includes a provision to extend Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. This is a really bad thing that gives the U.S. government power to conduct mass warrantless surveillance against Americans. The way that they justify it is they say that the law is designed to target foreigners that aren't in the United States, but the way it's written is that it allows them to collect surveillance of any Americans that they interact with. And that includes, you know, wiretapping and collecting text, emails, and things like that. And it just has been abused and abused. But they are voting to extend it. So it was due to expire at the end of this year, and this extends it to April 19th of next year. According to Thomas Massey, House representative from Kentucky, He said that the House only needed 143 votes to strip the extension out of the NDAA, but only 118 House members voted nay, including 73 Republicans and 45 Democrats. So they couldn't get 143 members of the House to vote against this. And when it comes to just the size of the NDAA, again, it's $886 billion. That's $28 billion more than last year. This is something that increases every year. And Biden's looking for the over $100 billion for all that military aid on top of this. And I'll probably have a few more stories next week about specific amendments to this NDAA, the things that are worth highlighting. One thing I saw is that it includes a lot of provisions to facilitate the military buildup in Asia, near China, to prepare for this future war with China that these U.S. military officials are always talking about. And one of those amendments allows the Pentagon to transfer 3 nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines to Australia as part of the AUKUS military pact that was signed between the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. They signed it in 2021, and it's basically a military technology sharing deal. And the first phase of this, they eventually want Australia to be able to build their own nuclear-powered submarines so they can, sail them near China. Obviously, that's what this is about. But the first phase of this is the U.S. selling them nuclear-powered submarines. So that has been approved now by this NDAA. All right, so the next one here, Congress okays a bill to prevent any president from leaving NATO. So this is actually an amendment to the NDAA. So packed into the NDAA that's been approved by both the House and the Senate is an amendment designed to prevent any future president from withdrawing the U.S. from NATO. The legislation was a bipartisan effort led by Senators Marco Rubio and Tim Kaine, and it would prohibit the president from leaving NATO without Senate approval or an act of Congress. So Kaine said the legislation, quote, reaffirms U.S. support for this crucial alliance that is foundational for our national security. It also sends a strong message to authoritarians around the world that the free world remains united, end quote. So Kaine, Rubio, and other hawks in Congress obviously do not have to worry about President Biden trying to leave NATO, as he is such a staunch supporter of this alliance and everything that they're doing in Ukraine. I've heard Biden call the U.S. obligation to NATO sacred, multiple times. The legislation, this was likely designed with Trump in mind. Now, Trump never said he would pull out of NATO. That's not something he's saying now as he's running again. But he has been critical of the alliance. Specifically, his big thing was he wanted other members to spend more on their military, like Germany. He wanted less of the burden to be on the U.S., when so much of it is on the U.S. But when Trump was president, NATO expanded into 2 countries. Montenegro in 2017 joined NATO, and North Macedonia in 2020. So this idea that Trump, would just pull out of NATO is just not true. But, this sets the groundwork for if any future president, gets elected on a real non-interventionist platform, that the Congress would handcuff them when it comes to exiting this entangling alliance. When Washington talked about entangling alliances, it doesn't really get more entangling than NATO. Now there's 31 members with Finland joining, soon to be 32, and the U.S. is handing out war guarantees to all these countries. All right, so the next one here, Israel says that the war will last more than several months. So this was on Thursday. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in televised remarks that Israel's brutal assault on Gaza will continue for more than several months. So this was, again, televised, and if you watch this video, Sullivan went to Israel, and one of the things he said he was going to do was to discuss a timetable about the war. And we have seen Blinken and other officials say that they don't want this to last too long. They don't want it to drag out too long. And then here we have Gallant and Sullivan talking to the press before their meeting, and Gallant is just telling Sullivan, this thing's going to last. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going and going. And thanks for all your support, by the way. I mean, it was almost seemed like a humiliation ritual, basically Gallant just showing that, you know, they can just tell them what they want, that they're dictating the war, not the U.S. So anyway, Sullivan, sorry, I'll just read the quote here from Gallant. I'm getting a little mixed up here. Gallant said, quote, Hamas is a terrorist organization that built itself over a decade to fight Israel, and they built infrastructure under the ground and above the ground, and it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them. So thank you once again for coming to Israel, for helping us, and for supporting us, end quote. So U.S. officials have said that the U.S. wants Israel to conclude the current phase of the war, which includes these relentless airstrikes and the ground campaign, and they want them to wrap that up within a few weeks and then shift to more targeted strikes against Hamas instead of this siege and war against the entire population of Gaza. According to a report in Axios, Sullivan told Netanyahu and his war cabinet, which includes Gallant, that Israel should, quote, transition to the next lower intensity phase in a matter of weeks, not months, end quote. And based on Gallant's comments, you know, it doesn't sound like he's talking about a lower intensity. He's saying what we're doing right now is going to continue for months, more than several months, a long period of time. And there's no sign that the U.S. is using any of the leverage that it has over Israel to achieve that end, as U.S. officials continue to promise unconditional military support. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said that Sullivan asked hard questions when he was in Israel, but he did not dictate terms to the Israelis about how long the war has to take. Kirby added that the war, he basically said, the war has to go on for as long as the Israelis say. So we're seeing these headlines about the U.S. telling them to wrap things up, but realistically, they're not putting any pressure, not threatening to cut off military aid or anything like that. And, you know, just the situation in Gaza is so horrific. Besides the over 18,000 killed, nearly 50,000 have been wounded, and that includes thousands, probably tens of thousands of children that are wounded, many of them maimed, and you know, it's just so horrific. 90% of the population has been displaced. Healthcare system is completely shattered. But doesn't matter. Keep sending them bombs. All right, I want to mention again that it's our fundraiser at antiwar.com, and we actually have matching funds right now up to $30,000. So if you can go help us out with that, we're doing pretty good. Things are going well. We need to, you know, kick it into a higher gear though. To finish this thing up, we still need to go a long way. So if you go to antiwar.com/donate, you can see the different ways you can support us. And this is how we do it. We're entirely reader funded. If you like this show, this is the only way it's possible, is through readers and listeners and viewers like yourself kicking in and helping us out. So again, antiwar.com/donate. The year's almost over. You could write it off on your taxes. We're a nonprofit, so that's always a good benefit. So any amount helps out. So please help us get this fundraiser over with so we could focus on what we do here. All right. So the next one here, nearly half of all Israeli munitions dropped on Gaza are dumb. So nearly half of the air-to-ground munitions Israel has dropped on the Gaza Strip are unguided or dumb bombs. This was reported by CNN on Thursday, citing a U.S. intelligence assessment. The report said Israel had used 29,000 air-to-ground munitions in its bombardment of Gaza, 29,000 bombs that they've dropped. And I would say the vast, vast majority of those are American. I know the Washington Post reported that Israel dropped 22,000 American-provided bombs in just the first month and a half. So it seems to me, I'm not sure if it's all their bombs are American, but the vast majority are provided by the U.S. government. And this total does not include artillery shells and tank munitions. So they're also firing artillery into Gaza, and the tanks obviously are shooting targets. And this assessment was from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and it found that 40 to 45% of the 29,000 munitions have been dumb bombs, and the rest have been precise guided munitions. So that basically means unguided munitions means they're dropping them out of a plane and hoping they hit their target. They don't have a GPS guiding system. So they're generally considered more of a threat to civilians because they're just more indiscriminate in their nature. You don't know if you're going to hit the exact target. But Israel is also killing civilians with precision-guided munitions. We know from that report from 972 magazine that Israel is intentionally targeting civilians as part of its strategy. That's a report from an Israeli magazine that cited Israeli intel sources that seemed very thorough. And just judging by the destruction that we see in Gaza, it's just very hard not to believe that they're not targeting civilians purposely. Either they're not or they're very bad at what they're doing. But anyway, there's also an investigation from Amnesty International that looked at 2 airstrikes that Israel launched using joint direct attack munitions. Those are JDAMs, and those are kits that the U.S. gives Israel. And these kits can turn dumb bombs, unguided bombs, into guided bombs. And this Amnesty investigation found that in 2 strikes in Gaza, 40 people were killed, including 19 children, with these JDAM bombs. And Amnesty is calling for this to be investigated as a war crime. So it's just an example of how, the precision-guided bombs are killing civilians at a mass scale, too. And this intelligence assessment comes after President Biden labeled the Israeli bombing campaign indiscriminate, but he vowed to continue supporting it anyway. All right, so the next one here, Biden staffers demand ceasefire at historic White House vigil. This article is from Common Dreams, and it says that dozens of Biden administration staffers held a vigil outside the White House late Wednesday, calling for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza as the Palestinian territory's healthcare system collapsed and the U.S. armed Israeli military bombed the entirety of the besieged strip. So the staffers donned masks and sunglasses to conceal their identities, likely out of fear of retaliation from an administration that has been accused of cracking down on dissent against President Joe Biden's support for Israel's assault on Gaza. Josh Paul, the former State Department official who resigned in October over the administration's weapons transfers to Israel, also took part in the demonstration and delivered remarks on behalf of the staffers. So he said, quote, "We were horrified by the brutal October 7th attacks on Israeli civilians and have been horrified by the disproportionate response by the Israeli government, which has indiscriminately killed thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza and displaced over 1 million more. We have seen refugee camps, hospitals, schools, and entire neighborhoods bombed. We have seen dead men, women, and children pulled from the rubble in their pajamas. We have seen harassment, humiliation, and degradation of many kinds. That is unacceptable," end quote. So, and then demanding the call for a permanent ceasefire. So interesting to see Biden staffers doing this, more dissent from within the administration. All right, so the next one here, witnesses say IDF troops executed women, children in a Gaza school. So this article is from Brett Wilkins, and it says that eyewitness testimony reported Wednesday by Al Jazeera accused Israeli troops of massacring forcibly displaced women and children sheltering at a school in northern Gaza, an allegation that prompted a leading Muslim group to demand a response from Biden. So the reported massacre took place at the Shadia Abu Ghazla school in the Al-Fallujah area west of the Jabalia refugee camp, so it's in the northern Gaza Strip. Video footage aired by the Qatar-based news network showed numerous covered bodies piled in one of the school's classrooms. One unidentified witness said, quote, "The Israeli soldiers came in and opened fire on them. They took all men, then entered the classrooms and opened fire on a woman and all the children with her, including newborn children," end quote. It's basically saying Israeli soldiers massacred these people with rifles, executing in person. And this is the allegation from this report. I haven't seen a response from Israel. I haven't seen anybody ask the Biden administration about it, but we'll see. I'll try to follow up on this to see what the response is, or if there's more evidence of this, of these executions. And there's been other reports like this. This one seemed to be the most substantial that I've seen so far. All right, so the next one here, Hamas signals an interest in negotiating a ceasefire. So Ismail Haniyeh, the chief of Hamas's political bureau, who is based in Qatar, signaled on Wednesday that he was interested in negotiating a sustainable ceasefire with Israel. He said, quote, "We are open to discuss any arrangement or initiative that could end the Israeli aggression," end quote. Suggesting that he favored some sort of two-state solution, Haniyeh said he was open to, quote, "putting the Palestinian house in order in both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip," end quote. And he said he was interested in entering talks that could lead to, quote, "political path that secures the right of the Palestinian people to their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital," end quote. I wanted to make sure that I was quoting him because the wording is interesting. So he also called the idea of a post-war Gaza without Hamas delusional. It's basically saying Hamas is not going anywhere. And he also said that the fight in Gaza was approaching its honorable end due to the resistance of Hamas fighters and other militant groups against the Israeli invasion. So now his deputy, Mosu Abu Marzouk, who another Hamas official, I believe based in Qatar. I think he's moved around over the years from Lebanon and Syria, but I think now he's in Qatar. So he suggested that Hamas might be willing to recognize Israel, but he later appeared to walk back the statement. He told Al Monitor that one idea, he said, we should follow the official stance of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which recognized Israel as a state under the 1993 Oslo Accords. But the following day, Abu Marzouk said that there was a misunderstanding, adding, quote, "I therefore confirm that Hamas does not recognize the legitimacy of the Israeli occupation and does not concede any of the rights of our Palestinian people. We confirm that the resistance will continue to liberation and return," end quote. So he kind of walked that back, but still they're both kind of hinting at negotiations and not just kind of for hostage release for like a lasting deal. Now, while they're doing that, it's unclear if these officials are really speaking for Hamas, the Hamas militants and leaders that are in Gaza that are currently fighting the Israelis on the ground. And, these guys are the ones in Qatar, nice and comfortable. So I'm not really sure of the relationship between them at this point. What's interesting is that Hamas has a political office in Qatar because the U.S. asked Qatar to host them because they wanted to open up a diplomatic channel. So now that they're sending these signals, there's also another issue is that there's no sign Israel is interested in anything like this at all. Netanyahu is saying they're going to eliminate Hamas and all that. And Haaretz reported on Wednesday, as I covered yesterday, that the Israeli war cabinet blocked the Mossad chief from reopening hostage negotiations with the Hamas officials in Qatar. So they don't even want to talk about hostages anymore. They're not going to want to talk about a two-state solution with Hamas being the government. That's just not on the table right now. But still interesting that they're sending these signals. I saw another report in Israeli media, kind of very loosely sourced, so I wasn't too sure about it, but it said that there's rumors that Hamas leaders are leaving Qatar because they fear for their safety, which sounds like, if that's being reported in Israeli media, that means is Israel thinking about taking action against them? That would really end the chance of any sort of negotiations. All right, so the next one here, poll says that close to 90% of Palestinians want Abbas to resign. So this is from AP, and there was a wartime opinion poll among Palestinians that was published on Wednesday, and it showed a rise in support for Hamas and an overwhelming rejection of Mahmoud Abbas, who is the leader, the president of the Palestinian Authority, basically Western-backed, as this AP story puts it. And this is the authority that the U.S., that Biden keeps saying could rule over, govern the Gaza Strip after the war. But nearly 90% of these Palestinians, and this was conducted in both the West Bank and Gaza, want him to resign. I mean, they just view him as a puppet. He hasn't protected them in any way. The West Bank has been a war zone for the past year. And, you know, I remember when he entered Jenin after one of the big Israeli raids. This is well before October 7th, and he did not get a warm welcome. And again, this shows that support for Hamas is increasing as the violence increases, as Israel is destroying Gaza and the violence increases in the West Bank. I guess, you know, the support is higher in the West Bank than Gaza, in this poll at least, which is interesting. But, you know, I guess they see Hamas as the ones fighting Israel, while the PA is, you know, not doing anything. All right. So the next one here, the IDF blocks ambulances from reaching besieged hospitals in Jenin. So one thing that I failed to cover in the last few days is that there has been a huge Israeli raid in Jenin, in the West Bank city and refugee camp, where there's been a lot of violence over the past year. So this article is from Middle East Eye, and it says that the Israeli army has been obstructing the access of ambulances to hospitals on their way to transport Palestinians who have been wounded in an ongoing large-scale raid on Jenin city, now in its third day. At least 12 people have been killed and dozens wounded since the Israeli military launched a raid on Jenin and its refugee camp on Tuesday. Israeli forces have also besieged hospitals in the city, blocking anyone from entering or exiting. On Thursday, soldiers shot and killed a 17-year-old boy inside the Khalil Suleiman hospital compound, and this is something that was reported by Doctors Without Borders. And they also said that Israeli forces have stopped ambulances outside the hospitals from transporting discharged patients home. Doctors Without Borders said, quote, paramedics and ambulance drivers were ordered out of the ambulances, stripped and made to kneel in the street. The patients were left in the ambulances. All of this happened in full view of our team, end quote. First responders told Middle East Eye that Israeli forces have also been blocking ambulances from transporting to hospitals people who have been wounded in the raid. And apparently somebody bled to death, a 36-year-old bled to death in the ambulance while the medical team waited for the soldiers to allow them passage. So I saw this. I saw actually on Twitter, Doctors Without Borders tweeting out this statement, and I just read it, but my mind just read Jenin, West Bank, as I just assumed they were talking about Gaza. They're talking about besieging hospitals and treating medical staff like this. But no, this is happening in the West Bank. It's definitely not a good situation. And I know there's a lot of armed resistance groups in Jenin. I know one, I believe, is called the Lions Brigade, that has popped up in recent years. And that's who Israel has been targeting in the past year. They really started these raids up again in the West Bank at the beginning of the year. So the violence, you know, bigger raids, and Israel is launching drone strikes in the West Bank for the first time, since the early 2000s. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Rick Sterling, from Dallas to Gaza, how JFK's assassination was good for Zionist Israel. One from Daniel Larison, keep U.S. troops out of post-war Gaza. One from Ted Snyder, bad advice, Ukraine then and now. One from Gideon Levy, Israel's first unanimous war. And one from David C. Hendrickson, Hawks pushing for more fronts in Israeli military operations. So that is everything from me. That's it for the week. I hope everybody has a good weekend. You could always help our fundraiser out, antiwar.com/donate. One thing I wanted to let you know about is, I guess it's not next week, but the week after is Christmas. So I'm going to take a few days off. Christmas is on a Monday. Christmas Eve is a Sunday. So I'm going to take those 2 days off. So that means the week of Christmas, there's only going to be 3 episodes of this show. If there's big news, which there probably will be, we'll update the page with kind of the big stories. I'm sure there would be a lot of breaking stuff coming from Gaza, and obviously. But I'll be off for 2 days for Christmas. I'm a big fan of Christmas, and, I got to take off for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. But anyway, have a good weekend. I'll be back on Monday. Thanks for listening.